It began long before Wall Street, before central banks and credit swaps, before even the idea of a market as we know it, when the first rulers learned that gold and silver could buy not only armies and grain, but obedience itself, and that if the supply of trust could be stretched just a little further, perhaps they could buy time as well. That was the first illusion, that value could be rewritten by decree, that numbers stamped into metal could replace the weight of what the metal truly was. When Athens fought its endless wars, its silver mines ran dry, and the city turned to clever arithmetic instead of discipline. The coins became thinner, lighter, and duller. Soldiers were paid in promise, not metal. It was the same story that would echo again and again. A government running out of substance, but not imagination. Rome perfected that trick. Its denarius began as pure silver, the honest measure of imperial might. Then Nero shaved the coin. Successors diluted it further, until what once bore 100 parts of silver contained barely one. Yet the empire pretended nothing had changed. Markets, merchants, and soldiers were ordered to believe that the stamp still held meaning. Inflation was not an accident, it was a state policy disguised as survival. Every civilization that reached for permanence eventually faced the same arithmetic. Byzantium watched its Salatus lose the faith of the people it ruled. China's Song dynasty replaced coin with paper, a radical leap that turned trust into ink. And when emperors printed more than they could redeem, the miracle of paper became the monster of inflation. What began as innovation became contagion. Farmers burned notes that could no longer buy rice. Trade shrank. Dynasties collapsed, not from invasion, but from disbelief. Across those centuries, money revealed its true nature, not a substance but a story that only works while people keep reading. The moment the story breaks, when citizens, soldiers, and merchants stop believing that a coin is worth its face, the empire crumbles, no matter how strong its walls. Economic collapse is not just about scarcity, it is about betrayal. The ruler who melts coins or prints notes beyond reason breaks the unspoken pact between state and citizen. That value will be honored. In every ancient ledger we can trace the same fingerprints. The ruler's need for war or monument outweighs restraint. The mint becomes a tool of illusion. Prices rise, trust falls, and the empire calls it necessity. Collapse follows like gravity. The ruins of Rome, the forgotten mints of Byzantium, the ashes of Chinese banknotes, each one marks a civilization that mistook the medium for the miracle. What is striking is not that these societies fell, but that they all believed they were smarter than the last. Each thought their coinage reform, their new system, their decree, would tame the cycle. But history keeps its own accounting. The names change: drachma, denarius, paper yuan, but the math of collapse stays constant. When rulers tamper with value to sustain power, they trade time for ruin. The pattern was already written 2,000 years ago: inflation as hidden taxation, devaluation as policy, and collapse as consequence. Every modern crisis is simply an echo of this first betrayal, the moment trust was turned into a tool, and money stopped being a measure and became a weapon. By the 17th century, gold and silver had given way to a new form of magic: paper, promise, and persuasion. The empires of Europe discovered that belief could travel faster than ships, and for the first time in history, fortunes could rise or vanish without a single coin changing hands. The printing press that once spread scripture was now spreading shares. What faith once gave to heaven, credit now gave to markets. In Amsterdam, merchants who built the first stock exchange realized that paper could multiply wealth far beyond what ships actually carried. Then came the flowers, tulips, absurdly beautiful and absurdly expensive, traded as if they were royal estates. During the tulip mania of the 1630s, bulbs that could rot overnight were worth more than houses. For a brief, dazzling moment, logic evaporated. When prices finally cracked, silence fell on a city that had believed it had discovered perfection. It hadn't. It had discovered leverage, the art of buying with borrowed faith. The same fever swept through London a century later, dressed in different attire but powered by the same delusion. The South Sea Company promised untold riches from trade that barely existed. Politicians, nobles, even Isaac Newton himself were caught in its orbit. When the bubble burst in 1720, Newton is said to have sighed, "I can calculate the movement of the stars, but not the madness of men." It was the first modern confession of financial helplessness, that intelligence cannot outthink emotion when profit blinds reason. As credit systems matured, collapse became rhythmic, almost seasonal. The Panic of 1825 struck with speed that astonished even the Bank of England. Overextended speculation in Latin American ventures triggered a cascade of defaults that reached London's heart. For the first time, panic was not local, it was contagious. Investors from Paris to Hamburg ran for liquidity, and the age of global finance quietly began. Panic had evolved from a symptom into a structure. By the 19th century, the cycle had become formulaic. Cheap credit bred euphoria, euphoria inflated prices, and prices lured the gullible. Then a tremor, a bank failure, a rumor, a missed shipment, and the illusion cracked. Markets plunged, and governments scrambled to restore what they themselves had overinflated. It was a choreography of hope and despair that modernized with each century. The new fuel of this age wasn't metal or paper, but confidence in the infinite. Banks learned to lend 10 times what they held, nations borrowed against futures that didn't exist, and industrialization created the illusion that growth could outrun debt forever. Yet beneath every new invention, steam engines, railroads, telegraphs, was an old flaw. Human memory fades faster than debt expires. Each panic left behind a rulebook. Regulators were born from ruins, laws written in the language of restraint. But those who followed them were never the ones who had felt the collapse. They were the children of recovery, raised in calm seas. As the memory of pain faded, the hunger for risk returned. That is why economic reform, in any era, is not a cure, but a pause, a truce between greed and fear, that lasts only until the next opportunity appears. What began in the marketplaces of Amsterdam and London soon spread to every empire that touched trade. Credit became civilization's bloodstream, and speculation its heartbeat. From the Mississippi bubble to the panic of 1893, the pattern repeated with mechanical precision. Innovation births optimism. Optimism inflates belief. Belief forgets consequence, and collapse reminds the world that prosperity without restraint is only performance. The age of speculation was not just a chapter in financial history, it was the rehearsal for modernity. It taught humanity that collapse does not destroy progress, it defines it. Every crash built a new system, but each system carried the same flaw, the belief that this time it's different. When the 20th century opened, money no longer sounded like coins or felt like gold. It whispered through telegraphs, typed through ledgers, and soon glowed on screens. The old empire of metal had died quietly, replaced by an empire of trust built on nothing but words, policies, and promises. Governments learned that control over currency meant control over people, and for a time, it worked. The Great Depression proved that progress could collapse under its own weight. Banks fell like dominoes, factories froze, and millions learned what it meant to lose everything without a single bomb being dropped. To end the panic, leaders built new faith systems, deposit insurance, central banks, and the idea that governments could guarantee value by decree. But the more power shifted to the state, the more fragile that faith became. Trust was no longer between people, it was between citizens and paper. In 1944, at Bretton Woods, nations signed a pact to anchor currencies to the US dollar and the dollar to gold. It was an order born from chaos, a promise that the world's wealth would rest on something real again. But as the decades passed, the same illusion returned. America printed more than its gold could justify, debts swelled, and confidence began to erode. Then in 1971, President Nixon quietly severed the last link between money and metal. Overnight, value became an idea with no anchor, floating on faith alone. From that moment, money stopped reflecting reality, it began creating it. Economies expanded on credit, consumers on loans, and nations on deficits. Growth became the new religion, and debt the sacrament. When the 2008 financial crisis arrived, it was not a surprise, it was an overdue confession. The system had built prosperity on promises too complex to understand and too large to fail. Derivatives, mortgages, and leverage turned invisible until they collapsed together. Banks that printed risk were rescued by governments that printed salvation. The pattern was ancient, only the code was new. Now, in the age of digital markets and algorithmic trades, collapse moves faster than thought. A single rumor can erase trillions, and currencies no longer live in vaults but on servers. The old contagion of fear still spreads the same way, from belief to disbelief, only now at the speed of light. We are told that this time is different, that technology can prevent panic, that central banks can manage the cycle. Yet every innovation merely changes the instrument, not the music. The rhythm remains confidence, expansion, distortion, collapse, and when the next one comes, it will not look like a crash. It will look like an update, a correction, a technical adjustment, until it isn't. Because the real engine of collapse has never been markets or machines. It has always been us, our trust, our fear, and our hunger for more than what exists. For 2,000 years, civilizations have tried to outthink this cycle. None have succeeded. The eternal crash is not a story about money. It is a story about belief, and belief always runs out. If you followed this journey through history's markets and mistakes, remember, the pattern only ends when we remember it. So if you found value in this story, like, share, and subscribe to Financial Ripples. Your support helps us keep uncovering the hidden truths of money, power, and time.